Hi, and welcome to Legally Speaking, a criminal law web series presented by Aitken Robertson. I'm your host for today, Phil Stiles. I'm a former Crown prosecutor turned criminal defense lawyer, and I'm your host for today's episode. We have a very important guest here today, Omar Ha-Redeye. He is a legal academic. He's a Toronto lawyer, and he teaches at Ryerson University, and is often featured in the media talking about his experiences. Welcome, Omar. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Phil. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, so today we're discussing drug driving. We're discussing quote-unquote drug driving laws. And we're right on the precipice of legalization. So this is the hot topic of today. You know, people are going to be driving now legally with, you know, in possession of marijuana. They can hold it in their hands. Question is, how much can be in your system? You know, what will be the indicia of impairment officers are going to be looking for? How is this going to be handled by the law? You know, so it's you know, it's kind of a new and exciting topic. We're going to see more of it in our world, and big question is how it's going to be approached by the law, and where the major litigation is going to be in the courtroom. So first of all, Omar, I'm just curious. You know, what's the roadside going to look like? You know, right now for alcohol, we have ASD. You have the approved screening device. You can be required to blow into a machine to test how much alcohol is in your system. For marijuana, for example, what are we going to expect at the roadside?
We don't really know quite just yet what Phil, because one of the challenges here is going to be that every province, every jurisdiction across Canada is going to take a slightly different approach. What I can speak to is some of the measures that the federal government has already approved or undertaken. So earlier this year, in the summer, in anticipation of legalization that's going to occur on October 17th, the federal government approved a specific device that looks at the saliva an individual and attempts to measure whether or not there are elements of THC, the active chemical or compound in marijuana that creates the psychoactive effects. And on that basis, they're going to attempt to identify a level of impairment. And there's some problems with that, I'm sure we're going to talk about. Also a protocol that's been relatively recently introduced to Canada. It's been used for a much longer period of time in the US, where the officers, perhaps in conjunction with these devices, or maybe if they don't have this device, are going to go through a 12-step protocol where they look at things like pupil reactivity and maybe how you respond to certain questions, if you're slurring your speech, all types of other things like that to identify whether impairment. Now, the reason why this is a live legal issue is because nobody really knows if either of these techniques, even if used in conjunction, so this live test or this visual interview-based process, is actually very effective. In fact, we have some indication from the use of these devices in other jurisdictions, in particular in Sweden and Australia, where law enforcement have been using it for a longer period of time, that these devices, in fact, are not very accurate. They are enormously sensitive to the type of calibration that these devices are set at. And so the police officers have a little bit of a dilemma. Either they calibrate it so that it's really, really sensitive, and thereby they can identify the presence of any marijuana in someone's system, but it becomes a lot more inaccurate. In other words, you're not going to be able to actually know precisely how much marijuana was in this person's system because of the calibration. Alternatively, you can have it at very high thresholds, only catch the individuals who are very highly, I guess, intoxicated by marijuana, meaning that you'll have a lot more precision. You'll actually be able to tell with greater specificity, you'll be able to tell that yes, accurately they have this much, but it means for the vast majority of individuals who might be using marijuana, especially recreationally, so law enforcement has a challenge ahead of us. And I think it's worth noting, even though there are some very important challenges scientifically as well as legally, there is a public health concern or public health consideration about ensuring that individuals wheel are impaired. And that's impaired with alcohol, marijuana, or really any other substance that's going to limit or prevent them from operating a vehicle safely.
Right, and that's a really interesting issue because our 80 milligram limit, that had been the subject of countless studies and reviews in Parliament, and it took us a lot to get to over 80 as the criminal limit, right? So, you know, what's going to happen now in terms of the way we look at marijuana? What will be a level of THC that will render somebody impaired for the purpose of operating a motor vehicle? You know, are we going to have statutorily aggravating limits? Is it going to be like alcohol, where if it's twice the legal limit, if ever that's ever decided, you know, is that going to be aggravating? It's interesting area. The other thing I was thinking about, Omar, was, you know, we've long accepted the common law indicia of impairment, you know, certain driving patterns, for example, problems with dexterity, everything to inform an officer's reasonable probable grounds that someone should be arrested, right? What is it going to look like with marijuana? I mean, we're in a whole different ballgame, really. You think about it, what's an officer going to say? Well, you know, he was doing 30 and a 60, or, you know, I saw him check his blind spot 6 times in 1 minute. You know, what's that going to look like? We've got, at this point, we're kind of starting with a blank slate. So I think it's going to be a hotbed of for litigation in the courts.
It's going to be, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head. The upside of legalization of marijuana is that we knew that a vast majority of Canadians, or not majority, a significant portion of Canadians were already using marijuana. And through legalization, not only can we try to ensure that the marijuana that's provided to the public doesn't have impurities in it, but also we can have a better understanding by removing the stigma as to what the actual effects of marijuana may be. And because alcohol is far more prevalent, it's more socially acceptable, it's been legal in our society, we've been able to identify and understand the signs of impairment of alcohol and try to make regulation around that. And again, there's challenges as it relates to alcohol. When we throw marijuana into the mix, it's going to be much, much more complicated. So when you ask me what's the levels, well, the new bill that was passed, the C-46, provides for multiple different levels. The lowest one on a summary conviction, between 2 to 5 nanograms, which is a relatively small amount, the fine for that being $1,000. The challenge here is going to be whether or not you can find 2 to 5 milligrams or 5 nanograms. And also that between individuals, there's quite a bit more variability when it comes to the use of marijuana than with alcohol. That there's differences with alcohol. Larger individuals can use larger amounts of alcohol without being inebriated. Their blood may go high. And we also know that for some populations in the world, especially in the Far East Asia, they have an enzyme that doesn't allow them to metabolize alcohol, meaning that they'll actually have much higher levels with smaller amounts of alcohol. So we know that there's variability there with alcohol. With marijuana, it is way more complicated. This is part of the challenge, primarily because, well, yes, people they metabolize marijuana in different ways, or the compounds in marijuana in different ways, but also because it's not excreted from the body in the same way. So right. Whereas alcohol, typically we say within 24 hours, you pretty much out the vast majority of the alcohol that was in your system. Marijuana, because it's what we call lipophilic, so it binds to the fatty tissues in your body. And if you're not a fat guy or skinny guy like yourself, we all have small amounts of fat in our body that the marijuana compounds are going to attach to. So, I mean, for weeks, perhaps months, trace amounts of marijuana are still going to be in the system. And so this poses many questions about appropriate and what's not. And so I mentioned the recreational users. If we start to think about individuals who are using medical marijuana, for example, this nanograms to 5 nanograms, they're probably always going to be over that, even if they haven't used any marijuana in the past 24 hours, even if they're not feeling any impairment, simply because of the fact that they've been using it for a very long period of time, and specifically for a medical issue. And so this is where I think we're going to start to see some problems here, is where the science demonstrates that the presence of the THC in a person's saliva has, in some circumstances, absolutely no connection to their level of impairment, absolutely no basis of actually affecting their ability to drive. I think you're going to have some difficulty imposing any kind of criminal sentence. And although I talked about the $1,000 fine, we do have, under this new bill, we have a maximum penalty. So this is where the drug impaired driving that results in death, the maximum penalty for that is life imprisonment. And so the fact that we have everything here, this very complicated regime, ranging from $1,000 fine all the way to life imprisonment, and it's very much based on how much THC you in conjunction with the use of alcohol, so alcohol makes it worse, means that we have a lot of litigation ahead. And because we're potentially depriving individuals of their freedom, we're locking them up theoretically, okay, because of these types of things, we're going to have some very close scrutiny in our courts about this regime.
Do you think we're going to end up with a stiletto test, i.e., is there any amount of marijuana in conjunction with impairment? We might end up there. I don't know. Omar, one interesting aspect I thought about was currently for impaired driving, or for driving with over 80 milligrams of alcohol of blood, over 80 milligrams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood, we have what's called the bolus drinking defense, right? So if someone gets out of a bar, they are just finishing their beer, they down their whole beer in front of their friends while everyone's cheering, and then they get right into their vehicle, and you've got someone on the road who has ingested the alcohol but doesn't necessarily have the illegal level of alcohol in their blood, right? And I won't get into the whole bolus drinking defense and how we run it, but that's essentially the principle. Now, with marijuana, we're dealing with a situation where we don't really have any conclusive evidence of how long it takes for all of the THC to get into the bloodstream. And it's gonna, when we're talking about a criminal offense and someone's life and liberty at stake, I have a feeling, just getting a sense of the forecast, that the courts are gonna have trouble accepting that because someone smoked a joint at a certain time, they were necessarily had a particular level of THC at a later time. The research is just starting in that regard. So yeah.
That's exactly it, Phil. So because of the fact that legalization is new to Canada, we actually have very little research. So we don't have a lot of information, primarily because any studies that have been done have been with very small populations with very limited research. So obviously now with legalization, there's business interest in ensuring that individuals are actually consuming marijuana, hopefully in the same safe way. And so we're going to anticipate that we'll have a much better idea of that variability. And you speak to the bolus defense. I'm glad you brought that up. We do know from the little bit of research that we have that THC, when it's inhaled, is quite often the highest soon after. So very similar to alcohol. But marijuana is different. If we actually consume marijuana, so we're talking about edibles, the increase in THC often peaks 3-4 hours after it's been ingested, sometimes longer. Again, it depends on the variability. And we're now seeing already individuals talking about releasing on the market things like marijuana or THC-infused wine. So I don't know how exactly the bolus defense, where someone who is consuming a very large amount of alcohol that's infused with THC, and so they have a spike in alcohol followed by a spike in marijuana and the THC 3-4 hours later. It's going to be very complicated, especially because we talked about these roadside tests that are being done. All of those roadside tests that are being conducted should theoretically, if they're positive, lead to an individual being taken to have a blood test. Well, that blood test may not happen for a couple hours, right? So right. At that point, the amount of THC and alcohol in their system is ready to climb even. And so that what we call the population modeling, or the models as to how alcohol and marijuana goes through someone's body, especially through different types of people, is something we're only going to begin to understand. And courts are really not that favorable, I would say, to what we call new science or novel science. They're resistant to that for good reason, because it hasn't been fully tested or fully tried. So again, I'll go back to it and I'll say I think it's a positive thing marijuana's bring. The government pretty much had an obligation to put in some sort of rules to ensure that the public is safe when it comes to driving. Here are going to be under enormous scrutiny, and I expect they're going to be revisited and redrawn once we have better scientific evidence.
That's right. No, I agree. And as you said, you know, edibles open up a whole nother can of worms. You've got, you know, just in terms of proving just simple things that you wouldn't think of initially, like voluntary consumption. You know, how much easier is it to eat the wrong brownie? You know, that defense isn't so much available with alcohol, but you know, it's just expanding this realm of litigation or potential litigation that, yeah, it's really interesting. Anyway, Omar, this has been a fantastic discussion, and I really appreciate you joining us today. This is, as I mentioned, you know, the hotbed of controversy in the courtroom, and we're only seeing, you know, the tip of the iceberg right now. After October, we're going to be really looking at a lot of work cut out for us as defense lawyers, because there's a lot of wrinkles to iron out here. That's for sure. Listen, that's all the time we have for today. Omar, I'd again like to thank you so much for joining us. Omar, for more information about Omar's work, you can visit www.omarha-redeye.com. And I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the next episode that we can expect. That's on November 1st, and we're going to be looking at the impacts of cannabis on custody disputes in the family law context. So another really interesting topic. Again, I just want to preface all of this. We're having a discussion about the law, but this is not to be taken as legal advice. If you want legal advice, you can call myself or Omar directly, and we can set you up with an appointment. Listen, this has been a real pleasure, Omar. Much appreciated. Again, if anyone would like to call into Aitken Robertson, you need legal skill, phone Phil. So again, thanks so much, Omar. It's been a pleasure.